So the first topic for today is how are we going to do how can we formulate a research question? How does it evolve? And then how to do literature search. So can you guys see my screen, the slide set? Okay. Anyone in the chat, if you can say yes or no? Let's see. Pull the chat up. Okay, give me 1 second. Okay, so I'm going to try to be more interactive and keep you guys engaged in this conversation. So what is research? Research is a systematic inquiry that describes, explains, predicts, and tests and observe phenomena. Let me just take this away and then I can. Okay, so it can include like inductive methods where you take a specific observation and sort of take it to the generalized population, or you can do a deductive methods where you can take it to generalize and make it more specific. So anything that relates to description, explaining, predicting, or controlling an observed phenomena, that would be a research. For example, if you are looking for flights, you have to travel from Pakistan to New York and you go on any like Priceline or Expedia, you look for a flight. So you are researching for the flights that would travel from Pakistan to USA. So that's how, it's a systematic inquiry. Obviously, clinical research is far more intricate and it is far more complex and involves a lot of steps. We're going to keep it very simple. Why people do research? There can be a multitude of reasons why people do research. And it can vary from person to person. Overall, the goal of scientific research or clinical research is to improve the lives of others through scientific inquiry and innovation. So, for example, clinical trials going around medications to look at the prevalence, risk factors. The basic goal is to understand a specific illness and what kind of interventions we can put in place to improve the lives of others. And, based on those research inquiries, we can formulate policies and guidelines, and we can develop programs. Individually, I think, one thing that I've seen quite often is people want to do it, when they need it. For example, some of your residency applicants, and you want to make sure that it is filled, that the boxes for research publications and research experiences are filled on your resume. For later on, when people go to fellowships, they want to do it for fellowship reasons, and so on and so forth. But I think, even from the training programs perspective, we want to develop people who are clinical scholars, people who can can at least understand the research, apply the knowledge of research into making assumptions about different research that has been done and application of it to the people. So it is sort of part and parcel of what we do every day. So when we look at the hierarchy of evidence, and like I mentioned, we're just going to be doing an introduction. This is the quality of evidence hierarchy. From, if it's a pyramid, you go from bottom to up based on how it gets more evidence-based. So on the top and the bottom, which is it includes like expert opinions, commentaries, and this is not really rigorously studied. It's just an opinion. Then on the top of it is case report, case series. Then comes the observational studies, cohort studies, or case control studies, which are more observational studies if you see on your left side, which means you let the time run its course, but you don't do any intervention. So that's more sort of your observational studies. Non-randomized and randomized controlled trials, they are more experimental studies. So in these studies, what a researcher does is it actually puts an intervention in place and tries to look at the outcome measures. And the two broader categories can be randomized versus non-randomized controlled trial. And on the top of the pyramid is more sort of systematic reviews, meta-analysis, which what it does is it looks at the existing evidence, pull the results of from that evidence, and creates a summary analysis. In systematic reviews, it's more sort of a descriptive summary of things. In meta-analysis is the quantitative analysis. So let's say if a study is reporting change in depression scores after this patient has been on, let's say, ketamine, it's going to pull all the, if you're doing it on randomized controlled trials, it's going to pull the effect size from different randomized controlled trials and show you a single estimate whether ketamine is effective for depression or not. So this is what it means. Now, we did talk about study designs. There are two basic types of study designs. One is experimental studies, another is observational studies. So as we discussed previously, experimental studies are where there's an intervention that is done, and then observation of what happens as a result of that intervention. That's what we observe, describe, and interpret. So there are two main types: randomized and non-randomized controlled trials. And then your observational studies. One is cohort studies, case control studies, cross-sectional studies, ecological studies. And all of them, they have different definitions. So, but let's go back to the group and see what do you guys understand by observation, by the case cohort studies. So you can just message in the chat, and I'm going to look at it. So what does case cohort study means? What's the case control study? What's the cross-sectional study? Anyone? And it can be wrong. Anyone? We have 34 people in the chat, so I want 34 answers. So let's start off with case control study. What is your understanding of a case control study? Okay. So Kashif said, we know the disease in the beginning. And Kashif, what is it that we are trying to study? So we know the disease. What is it that we are trying to study? The causality, the risk factors, correct. The groups are decided based on the basis of outcome, which means that you have a disease, you don't have a disease, and then you look at different trends. Okay, that's good. What about your your cohort studies? Anyone? Okay. So we have risk factors, and we want to study the exposure, the development of the disease. Okay. Good. Yeah, so I think you guys are right on the spot. What's the cross-sectional study? It's a snapshot. Very good. So it is sort of cut right in the moment. It can be used for prevalence and other things. So it's right at that moment and see what is there. Great job. You guys already know this stuff, so we don't need to do that. So let's go through the next slide. And Basim raised his hand, so I want to come back to Basim too. I don't have that slide set here. But, let me explain a little bit about what, is cross-sectional study. So let's see is exactly what you guys are describing. So in cross-sectional study, let's say if I want to study the prevalence of lung cancer in Lahore. So what I would do is I will go and put up, some sort of outcome measure that is used to diagnose people with lung cancer. I do that and I look at the prevalence. So that's my cross-sectional study. I'm doing it right in the moment and right then. And it's a snapshot. And the case control study is we look at the risk factors and we explore for the risk factors. Let's put it that way. So I have 50 patients with lung cancer and I have 50 patients who does not have lung cancer. And I go back in time. So let's say I'm doing this study in 2022. I have the data, 50 patients with lung cancer, 50 patients without lung cancer. and I go back in their history until maybe 1980. And for both of them, I look at, okay, what are the different risk factors that can cause lung cancer in those patients? So that you're going back in time to see if these patients have risk factors. So basically is to identify the risk factors. Cohort study is where you are, right here in 1980, you have patients who are already smoking and people who are not, people who are smoking, you track them over time until 2022, and you see whether these patients, they develop lung cancer or not, right? Or if they develop heart disease or anything else. So this is very simple description of your case control studies, your cross-sectional studies, and your cohort studies. Now, what is a retrospective cohort study? Anyone? Anyone? Okay, so let me explain that. So retrospective cohort is a cohort study. Let me see, I think someone said, we'll go back and see different risk factors. So what happens is, here I'm in 2022. For example, Salia is here. So let's take her example. So Salia did a study, and she looked at, she did a cohort study where she had data from 1980 to 2020. And she looked at how many patients with the smoking developed heart disease, right? Now, me and Salia discuss, and we think like this is a good data to also look for whether patients with smoking develop, let's say, tongue cancer, heart diseases. So we go back in time and still study the same patterns to see if these patients will develop time. So you're doing it right in the moment, but you are using that data to track forward in time to see if that patient will develop a disease. So that is what is your retrospective cohort. Any questions so far, or is clear enough? Okay. Anything else? So with the name, which part do you want me to repeat? If you can use a real name. So snapshot is, let's say, Dr. Das, if I'm using, I want to study the prevalence of depression in Lahore. I go out and I pick the data from 8 schools, and I do PHQA. They fill it out. I calculate, and it gives me prevalence of depression based on the PHQA. Okay. Now I'm not going back in time. I'm not going back until 1980. I'm just doing it right in 2022, 2023, and doing all those. And I'm just doing all the measures right in their time. With the retrospective cohort or cohort study, you go back in time, and you look at the data from the past and track them over time. So retrospective cohort is, so it is sort of a mixture of case control or cohort studies. So let's say, again, same example, me and Salia did a study with depression with patients whose parents were home, the parents were smoking cigarettes or using alcohol. And I go forward in time and see how many kids will develop depression. So kids of those patients who were smoking, I started the study in 1980. We met, me and Salia, in 1980. And I track forward in time. I keep following up those patients. And then I come up with, okay, these many people who were smoking or using alcohol, their kids developed depression in 2023. Now, we have all this data. We track those people in time. Now, Salia thinks that, okay, I think we should also look at whether these parents have depression and if their kids also become depressed. So we want to go back in time, So all we'll do is we'll use the same data and we'll see how many of these patients will develop the depression, So you're basically going back in time and tracking the data forward in time and see how many people will develop depression. So this is sort of your retrospective cohort. So let me, okay. So in why research is necessary, because, if you see at the bottom is the remember and understand and apply. So this is the most clinicians do. They try to remember some facts, they try to understand that, then they apply. This is a mid-level, mid-order level thinking. However, what researchers does is they analyze the trends, they compare and contrast, they experiment things, they evaluate, and then they create hypotheses and they test those hypotheses. So that's high-level thinking. There are a couple of questions, so I want to just see. So there was a question, can case control, we take cases in control? Yeah, so I think that was from the future. Okay. Okay, let's cover a little bit more before we take on more questions. Now, how can you come up with a research question? And there are a lot of ways to do that. So some people might be interested in particular area. So for example, we have a group who is doing research on infant development in Pakistan, and that's their focus area. So what they do is, so you find a focus first where you want to focus, and it is usually stimulated by your own interest. So for example, someone might be interested in marijuana use, someone might be interested in depression. So you pick a focus area where you want to focus on, and all of you might have a focus area. Then, for example, I would say that my focus area is suicide, right? And then I would read up on that topic, and I'll see where is the knowledge that the gap that exists. So for example, I know that, past history of suicidal attempt is a risk factor for future suicidal attempt. So just doing that again and again is not going to be helpful because it's not the new knowledge. So you identify gaps. You see where is the knowledge lacking and whether you can add up to that knowledge that is lacking. And that's how you come up with the clinical questions. So I'm going to give you some examples, and you can generate different sort of publications out of that. So raise your hands so this is the screenshot on the left side is an example of khudkushi ki koshish karna jurm hai. This was posted on Punjab Police Facebook page a couple of years ago. Who saw that? Anyone? Raise your hands if you guys saw that, or give me an impression. Yeah. So the Brace raised his hand or her hand. So we wrote actually the opinion articles based on that. So we wrote, a review article, suicide and its legal implication in Pakistan, decriminalization of suicide, that was written by a friend, treatment not punishment. And then the bottom one is the Dawn editorial, suicide prevention. So you can also see where you want to advocate. And you can also turn it in a publication that can be published in different areas. So wherever the knowledge is lacking, for example, you can, as a clinician, when you are treating patients, you come across several questions along the way. So one question that was coming up in my clinical practice was, because I'm a child psychiatrist by specialty. So we had quite a bit number of the patients where parents will use CBD, and I really didn't know what the evidence is for CBD in mental health. So we did a systematic review on cannabidiol, which is CBD in mental health. So you can see where the knowledge is lacking. Then we did, a study, like a lot of studies were published in the era of COVID. So we did on impact of COVID-19 and quarantine on psychosocial health, and what can be the possible solutions behind that. So this is how you can come up with research question. You keep your clinical hat on, you keep always exploring and see, where knowledge is lacking, where you can add more to the scientific world, and you do that. Now, why we develop research question? So research question, because research question helps you design your study screening process. If you're doing an original study, it's going to help you understand, what kind of outcome measures you want to use, what kind of patient population you want to pick, what kind of analysis do you want to do. So research question is really important in that aspect. Research question should be feasible, novel, it should be interesting, it should be ethical. For example, there was, this huge controversy in patients, in African-American patients in the US, where they let people with syphilis, I think it was syphilis, go untreated for significant length of time just to see what are the long-term complications of syphilis, which was completely unethical, because and it was only focused on African-American, and it created a lot of mistrust in the scientific on the scientific world. So you want it to be feasible. You want to make sure that your study team can carry it. It should be something that is a gap in knowledge. It should be novel. And then your research question. So I'm mostly going to focus on, because second part of this conversation is going to be focused on literature research, and in future I'll talk about systematic reviews, and we'll also do a session on meta-analysis. I'm going to focus mostly a research question in the context of doing a review article. So for example, that's right, thank you, Sharik. So for example, I have a research question that I want to come up with, and I want you to help me design different things along the way. So I want to study the treatment of ADHD, right? So we know there are two classes of medications that are used for treatment of ADHD. One is stimulant and other one is non-stimulant. The non-stimulant one is atomoxetine, Intuitive, which is guanfacine, clonidine. Now, I want to ask you, how does atomoxetine works? Anyone? Except psychiatrists in the room. How does atomoxetine work? Okay, so Basim said is SNRI. Varsha said is a norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor. It increases the release of dopamine. So atomoxetine is a norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor. Okay. Now we know that bupropion helps with ADHD. Then there are a lot of new medication came among the class of SNRI that are more norepinephrinergic than other classes in that medication. So for example, venlafaxine at higher doses, it has more norepinephrinergic potency. Similarly, Vertoxic, milnacipran, levomilnacipran, they are highly norepinephrinergic medications. So I want to see, I don't have a lot of options as a clinician for ADHD when it comes to non-stimulant medications. I have only a few choices. So I want to see whether these medications, because if atomoxetine is working for ADHD, whether milnacipran or levomilnacipran also works for ADHD. So because they both work the same way, so it should be able to help somewhat. So the newer treatment, so for example, when we look at the milnacipran, the ratio of norepinephrinergic to serotonergic action is 1 to 6. So it's 6 times more potent on norepinephrine than serotonin. So I want to see what's the evidence for milnacipran for ADHD. Now, let me take you guys to this slide first. So when I look at the milnacipran in ADHD, there's not a lot of studies that are done. This is PubMed view. When I just search for it, there are only 12 studies, and most of them might not be original articles. So what I want to do is I want to modify my search a little bit. So I want to see, and this is how exactly you can do it, whether milnacipran or levomilnacipran, if there are no ADHD studies, whether in patients where they were being used for depression and anxiety, whether they independently improved attention and concentration. So that will show a link between its efficacy for attention and concentration. So, and that's how, a lot of medications were rolled in. So for example, if for the MAOIs, when they came in, originally they were used for tuberculosis. And they found that in patients where they were using it, it was helpful for patients, helpful in patients with depression too, who had tuberculosis. So then that's how that drug came into the market. So similarly, you can do that too. So now we have our research question here can be whether efficacy and tolerability, or however you want to do it, milnacipran in for attention and concentration. So when we'll do, one of the topics that we're going to cover in this courses is going to be mostly focused on systematic review. So we'll talk about, how to develop the search terms, what we're going to do. And this is why it's really important to attend all of them, because it's going to be done sequentially. So you look at, okay, I want to do a systematic review on and meta-analysis on. Okay, so this is what you do. So next thing, what you do is before you go and search is you develop a search strategy for ADHD. So give me a search strategy that I can use. And I can explain before we go there, I can explain different concepts to you. So Boolean operators. Does anyone know about Boolean operators? What does this and or not means? Okay, so basically, let me go back. I think only Amber's had yes. So let me explain that. So what and does is, if I will use the word and, it's gonna retrieve articles from PubMed or any databases that has both those words. So for example, I want to study milnacipran in efficacy for attention and concentration. So I'm going to say milnacipran and you can say attention I'm just going to make it very simple. So what is it going to do is going to pull any articles that has milnacipran and ADHD as part of it. Okay. Now, if I want to use or, now I use milnacipran. Now, ADHD might be covered under different names. So it can be ADHD or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder or attention or concentration. So in the studies that will be using a variation of, let's say they're using attention deficit hyperactivity, they're studying attention or concentration, is going to pull any results that going to have milnacipran or variation of ADHD. Another example would be, let's say if I want to use milnacipran I want to develop a search strategy for milnacipran. So depression or depressive or major depressive disorder. So this will pull anything that would include for these different disorders. So or means you want to use it if you have different terms that are used for a disorder or to describe an outcome, and you want to pull it, you use or. So it's going to pull all of them, whatever you're using. When you use and, it's going to pull both of them. Okay. Not is, let's say if I want to use not here, and I say ADHD, so it's going to pull anything that has milnacipran and depression, but it's not going to pull things that have ADHD. So this is definitely, this is how you define your search term. So let's see if I want to study milnacipran efficacy in attention and concentration based on randomized controlled trials, what should be my search terms? You can be wrong. So I will put the first one, milnacipran. Now, I want to use and because I want to add different, I also want to add things that are related to attention and concentration. So what we can use for attention and concentration here? Anyone? Or ADHD or things that may, assess for concentration? You can be wrong. Okay. So let me do that so we can keep moving. It seems like, so I can do attention, I can do concentration, I can do. So you don't want to use name of a questionnaire because usually that will restrict you. You want to use the terms that are more widely used. If you use PHQ-9, that's really going to restrict your search terms. Dr. Dust, we can use hyperactivity too. Anything else? We can also use, yeah, so I already mentioned attention concentration. I can make is in attention, so that will cover it. You can use ADHD. That's really good. So another thing that you can use is, let's say if you want to use inattentive, but you have inattention already in there. So you can use, we call this tronication. So tronication, when you put that here, it's gonna use anything that would be in variation of this first 6 or 7 letters. So inattention, inattentive, whatever that may be. So let's see if I just use this, for example, this is sort of my search term. Now, let's see, I want to go to PubMed and I want to pull it. But before we go to PubMed, I want to explain it to you what is exactly PubMed and how can you use different, search engines and things like that. So when we are searching, you can pull, and like I said, I'm going to discuss in the context of a systematic review. So I'm going to do, describe it in the same way. So search for evidence-based information. You can do it from electronic databases. So what does electronic databases mean? I will describe it. You can also contact experts. You can look at the journals that are published by various societies or independent journals and see if they are publishing all of that. But what happens is most of these journals are indexed in some sort of electronic databases. So let me explain to you what electronic database means. How many of you have used Priceline or Expedia? Anyone? Okay. So have you used Expedia? So Varsha, let me have any one of you use hotels.com or booking.com, Cheapo Air, Priceline. So what does they do? Or biking.com. So what they do is they have information about, so for example, Priceline is a website that you can use to reserve or book hotels, cars, flights, things like that. So I can also go to, let's say I want to fly from New York to Lahore. I can go into it, so it shows flights for Etihad and Emirates, right? I can go to Etihad and Emirates and I can look for their individual flights. But that's going to take a lot of work to go to each airline and look for each flight. So what I do is, so what Priceline does is it pulls the information from all those different sources into one single database. So Priceline is going to show me all the flights that are traveling for these dates from New York to Lahore, right? So it makes your job much easier. Similarly, what does electronic databases means, and we'll primarily emphasis on PubMed today, and then we'll do the our webinar on systematic review, we'll go more in detail. So there are different electronic databases. So what happens is, so for example, PubMed, let's say if I'm publishing an article in JPMA, which is Pakistani-based journal or American Journal of Psychiatry, if they are indexed in PubMed, what that means is it's a data repository. All those journals gonna index, the articles by those journals gonna get indexed in PubMed. So if I go to PubMed, I can pull all the articles that might have been done on this topic. So there is Cochrane, Embase, PubMed, Scopus, Web of Science, PsycInfo, and then there are some specific ones that are for some specialties. So for example, CINAHL, it's a nursing database. PsycInfo is a psychiatry database. So usually, for systematic review, you need 2 or 3, but usually I keep it like 4 to 6 to include everything. So we sort of looked at this slide previously. So if we are exploring the role of milnacipran in ADHD, it's showing me only 12 studies. So you can modify your search term by a little bit. So what I did here was I kept milnacipran there because that's the agent that I want to study. But I added ADHD or depression. So it's going to pull any articles that are on ADHD and depression. And I can go and I can study whether it milnacipran helps with attention and concentration. Now, last thing would be, I want to show you how to pull the results from these different databases, and we'll do that in future too, a little bit more in detail. So I have developed a search team with my team. I go into, I'm going to pull PubMed. And I want you guys to be more active here. So because you guys are gonna forget it by the end. So I do it here and I put that search term here, then I do the search. So see, it showed me roughly about 444 articles that have been published on this. Now, this can be highly inaccurate. So this is why in systematic review, we do the screening. Now, you can use it to write your review article. You can do it to write your systematic review, your scoping review. But, see, there was not a space, so it showed me an error. So I'm going to run it again. Okay, so you can do it to do your narrative review, your systematic review, your scoping review. Now, how can I pull? Because this would be really, a lot of time to review them individually in PubMed, and you might be looking at more than one databases. So what do I do? In that case, EndNote can be really helpful. And, for those who are in Pakistan, you can get EndNote very easily. So what I do is I send it to Citation Manager. If you have EndNote on your desktop, it's going to send it there. On this, you go here, you do all the results. Otherwise, if you do this, it's going to only pull, these 10 articles. So you do all the results and you create a file and you send it there. So if you see it here, it has sent me a EndNote file of PubMed. Now, I want you guys to tell me how should I proceed from here. So I have put it here. I'm going to do search. what I'm going to do next to bring it to EndNote. Anyone? So I do send to, and then I click for citation manager. Then I do all results. I create a file, and you see it sent me a file here, which I can download. Okay. Now, please tell me how to do that. So I press the search again. What should I do next to bring it to EndNote? What would be the first step? Send to, and then citation manager, and then click on all results, and then create file, and it send me here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to download it on my desktop. Now, this is what you do for most, electronic databases. You take the search term. You may have to modify based on individual search engine, but mostly it's the same. Now, I have this file in EndNote, and I want to search bring it to one Excel file so my team can screen it later. So how to do that? So let me open EndNote here. So this is my EndNote file. So you can name it, this file too, on your desktop. So what I'm going to do is, remember, I go to here, I'm going to import this. If you see my desktop, and don't look at all of my desktop, it's really chaotic. This part is done, so I don't want to come to it. Let me pull my PubMed. So you see this PubMed file. I want to pull it to EndNote. So what I'm going to do is, and I want you guys to go over it with me. We're going to do it together. So first I will go to file, then I will go to import. So if you guys see, there is a show option here. I click on this show option. The import option, it really changes. If you choose different ones, it's gonna, if you do others, it's gonna show you a whole list of different electronic databases that you can use. I want to use PubMed because I have, done it a few times. So PubMed is already in my favorites. So I do it, click PubMed. Then if you are using more than one electronic database, so a journal might be indexed in PubMed and Scopus or, Google Scholar. So you want to make sure that you're not pulling it from different sources. So you pick for discard duplicates. Okay. You go here and then you hit import. Let's see if I didn't make a mistake. So go here, click on PubMed to PubMed. Okay. So see, it pulled all those results into that. There were 444 results. All of them, they came here. Okay. So let me see if we can do it once more together. Yeah, Kader, you have done a few times, so you are ahead of curve. So I want to open a new file, and you can name this library as, okay, I want to name it as ADHD, however you want to do it. So tell me, I know, don't look at the Kader's response, but tell me, what do I do next to get started? File. Okay, what's next? Import. Okay, what's next? Okay, I'm at import. So show options. I'm going to click PubMed, but before I go there, I need to click on this. So show options is PubMed, and I'm going to import that. Okay. So all of those results are here. Now I'm going to take it to, yes, Kashif, I forgot to mention that. Thank you. Now I'm going to move it to the Excel sheet. How to do that? So you create first an output style. How do you want it to go? So if you go to edit, there's an output styles. You can create a new style. So it shows you a new style. And this part is a little bit tricky. So then you click on under bibliography on your left side, you click on template. So it's going to pull templates for you. Okay. Then you're going to go on the top part, references type, click on generic. Now, if you see this part opened up for me, okay, I go on to my right side. If you see there's an insert field on the right side, there's a drop-down menu. So I want to, into the Excel sheet, I want to pull some information there, okay? For example, I want to pull author names. Then you do tab after each entry. So I want to do tab. Then I want to pull the year of publication. Then I want to do tab. Then you can pull the title. Need to do tab again. Then you can, let's say I want to pull the abstract. Where is the abstract? Here it is, abstract. Okay. Then I will do tab again. I also want to pull the DOI number. Share. Okay. So once you're done with this, and there's one additional step here, like author names. You can also choose like how you want author names to appear on your list. So Jane Smith, other authors, you want to do last name, first name, capitalize the first one. So this is pretty simple. Now I want to save this output style. And you can say it is for my systematic reviews. So I want to save it here. Now this is saved. Okay. Now, before you export it into the Excel file, or as an Excel file, one last thing you need to do, you go to edit. And then you choose for find and replace. And go to select a field. And it is being recorded, so you can listen to it later. I click for any field. And here you pick for carriage return. Okay. Now see the cursor in the find section is going to move. So it's moved, and you want to replace it with semicolon and then do the change. And if this warning appears, it means you're on right track. So it made the changes. Now I want to export it to an Excel file. So you go to export. Let me see, someone sent a message. Which one do you want to understand, the carriage return part, or which step? Carriage return. Okay. So you go to edit. You go to find and replace. You go to find, select a field, say any, do the carriage return. And here you're going to do a semicolon. Okay. And then you click on change. So since we already done that, it's not going to make that change again, but that's how you do it. Now, all of this is highlighted. I don't know what carriage return means, but I think what it does, it changes some entries to, to as a semicolon. Atif, this is being recorded, so you can listen to that too later. So now I want to export it to the Excel file. So what you do is, you click here, text only, then numbers, and you save it. So it's going to be saved on your desktop. So if you see, this is my EndNote library, ADHD. So this is here, it is saved. Now I want to open it as an Excel file. So this is your Excel file. So I want to open a new Excel file. So you go here in the second row, first column. And what you do is you import into here. And because your file type is the text file, you click on that and then you import. Now it's going to do some import. Sorry, I should have clicked for that. Get data. So it's going to show us some prompts, but you can do next, import. So it has pulled all those results here. I think I made a sort of mistake here while pulling it. So let me go and see how it can appear in separate columns. Okay. Okay, let's try it once more. Share my screen. Okay, so what I need to do is probably I need to highlight all of these. Then let's try if it works this time. So I export it as a text file. Then I open another Excel file. Okay, I'm going to open a new one. There are a couple of questions which we'll answer. So I import again this text file. Okay, it's showing up again in this fashion. I think we missed something. So I will probably go back and we can explain that when we will do the systematic review. What is it that I'm missing here? Otherwise, it does show up in different, it should appear in different columns. So when we do the systematic review, we'll work on that. So now this is what we had so far for today. Someone asked a question about, about the retrospective cohort and the case control study. So let me pull up, I have to actually go and pull another lectures where we had it, and let's see if I can show it to you guys from there. Okay, so this is sort of your observational study design. So if you see this, man, think of it as it is 2023. Okay, so this man has a disease, and there are 50 men who have disease and 50 men who doesn't have a disease. So you pick them, you go back and you try to solve the question, which is exposure here. Okay, so this is your case control. Prospective cohort is where the question mark is on whether patient's going to develop disease or not going to develop disease. But they have exposure to, for example, smoking or not smoking, and whether they will develop lung cancer or not. So that is your prospective cohort. Now, look at the retrospective cohort and think of it as that you're doing this in 2023. Now, you have this data. What you do is that you go back, start from 1980, look at your data and see how many of these patients develop the disease. So when you're starting the data analysis, you don't know how many patients with smoking, you know that they have lung cancer, but you don't know if they develop heart disease as a result of smoking. But you want to know whether smoking can increase the risk of heart disease. So disease is unknown at this time, but you have the data of people who smoke, who had exposure or not exposure, and you sort of look and then see how many of them they develop the disease. So in this way, you do the retrospective cohort. Now, does it work same in other laptops or not MacBook? I think mostly the instructions will be same around MacBook. There might be some variation, but mostly it should be same. Now, any other questions so far? Now, someone asked question because, I think they probably attended some other things too, that we learn about the basic stuffs, but not about the more complex and actually doing things. I think what you need to do is, first of all, try to attend the whole course, because we'll mostly talk about case reports, how to write case reports, systematic reviews, and meta-analysis. And by the way, this is really, comprehensive work that you need to do, and it always start off with learning. So if you are not starting, then or taking the initiative, then you're gonna be stuck that you learn by doing things. So please start doing that. So in retrospective cohort, Amber, you divide the people based on exposure or no exposure, and you look at the whether they developed the disease or they didn't develop the disease. Okay, any questions for today? So, Basim, for, if you are doing, obviously, if you're doing narrative literature review, you have liberty. You can do based on one database, or you can do on 2 or 3. But if you're doing systematic review, if you look at the PRISMA guidelines, they will recommend that you at least search for 2 electronic databases. Most people would search for 4 to 8 electronic databases. The benefit of doing more electronic databases is that you don't, so some journals might not be indexed in PubMed, so they might be indexed in Scopus, so you don't want to miss out on them. But 4 to 8 is really reasonably a good number. How is it different from case control study practically? So in case control study, you know whether these people have disease or they don't have disease. In retrospective cohort, you only know that these patient has exposure or not exposure. You don't know whether patients with smoking are at high risk to develop ischemic heart disease or not until you do the analysis. If we go back and see hospital data and randomized control study data, would it be retrospective cohort? So Kashif, just remember that, in randomized controlled trial, there's an intervention that is happening. In the observational study, intervention is not happening. You are just observing the course of the illness. So that's how the both of them, they differ from each other. So PubMed is, they're not same thing. So PubMed, BMC is, central PubMed, and PubMed is different. So usually you want to use PubMed. So, usually going back to Kashif's question on what would that be called? So that would be sort of a secondary analysis, post hoc analysis, those sorts of, analysis. It would not be a retrospective cohort. Okay. Yeah, so gray literature is basically in gray literature, the studies that are not published for whatever reasons, they are usually deposited in gray literature. So usually, for the gray literature, studies who have positive findings, they're more likely to be published than study with negative findings. Okay, so that's why, in gray literature, people don't want to miss out on studies that may have negative results, because, if you look at the journals and publication, they generally don't publish negative studies. Let's say if, I'm doing a study on depression, some journals may not publish it if citalopram doesn't show any effect in depression. So, but most of them, most reputable journals publish those studies because this is clinically important. And, I very rarely have seen people using gray literature. How many which electronic databases are more commonly used? So PubMed, Scopus, Web of Science, Embase are the commonly used one. Cochrane is also one that is used, and then rest of it is mostly dependent on what's the scope of your study. So if I'm doing a psych study, I will add psych info, psych articles. If you are doing nursing-based study, you want to use SNL. ERIC, I didn't mention it. It was on the slide set. So ERIC is mostly about educational research. What is difference between publishing articles and PubMed? So you don't publish articles in PubMed. So what happens is, just like, take the example of Priceline. So it's a data repository. Flights are operated by American Airlines, Qatar, Etihad, but their information is actually deposited in Priceline. So similarly, PubMed, you don't publish directly in PubMed. What you do is you publish in different journals, and if they're indexed in PubMed, those journals will deposit those articles, or put their information or full text into PubMed. So you don't directly publish in PubMed. Okay. Any more questions, or we feel like we should wrap up? Okay. So Salia, thank you very much for being there, even though your mic was not working. We'll share the recording later and go from there. If there are not any last moments questions, I'll wrap up. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining. And Sharik, let me show you the schedule. And I think it is shown in different places. So, but I can show it to you again. And just make sure that you attend all of them or most of them. So this is the schedule. Take a screenshot if you want to. So I will give a few seconds before people can take screenshots. And we will share in different groups too. Okay, well, with this, we'll wrap up. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining here. Have a good day.